Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's product journey update on Daily IoT. If you remember from last time, we finally got partial update working on the screen, which is super exciting. So everything's working well there for displaying stats on the little screen, on the little e-paper display. And I was moving on to getting HTTP, what I'm calling the HTTP client, working on the device so that I can reach out to the cloud, grab updated stats, and pull them down to the hockey puck. Now for this, again, we're running into more GPL nightmare. I'm not a big fan of the GPL license, as I made reference to in a previous update, but I found out that the HTTP wrapper that I was using was also GPL, which makes it a deal breaker for putting into my product. Again, for those of you that are just joining in on the journey, if you use GPL licensed code in your project, it infects your entire project. So your entire project now has to take on the GPL license and be released under that license, which includes giving your source code away to any of your customers who would like to see it. Which again, I'm not anti-open source, as I mentioned before, love open source. I just think that that's a terrible thing for people that are trying to make a living by writing software. And so what that means is we have to come up with a different option for our HTTP code on our hockey puck project. And as I started doing searching, so first of all, a little bit of backstory. HTTP is really not very complicated. A very basic, especially for what I'm doing, a very basic GET request to a web server and getting a response back with stats is a very, very simple thing to accomplish in HTTP. It is a well-defined protocol that essentially is just connect to a remote server, send a few lines of text. This text is extremely well defined through the HTTP spec, and it's not very complicated at all. A lot of it you could just hard code, send to the server. The server says, oh, I know what you need. Let me get that for you. And then over that same socket, you read to get a response back from the server. Again, a very well-defined set of lines of text that make up the HTTP protocol, and you get the data that you requested and you're off to the races and having a good time. However, so it's not very hard, but there's some amount of work to implement that and then to test it and make sure that you haven't forgotten some simple thing here and there. And so what I started to do was write my own implementation of HTTP, a simple HTTP client using the TCP client that comes out of the box for you in Particle Photon world. As I started doing that, I thought, gosh, now I'm going to write this. There's probably going to be some little bug or something that I'm forgetting. And so I really should go back to this idea of borrow, buy, and build. And I started with build, which you should start with borrow, which is if somebody else has written something that you could use that first. And so I went out to look for just simple implementations of HTTP in C, basically, or C++, so that I could use it on the Photon. And I was surprised at how many of these things are GPL licensed. And I'm not sure if this is just a theme in hardware where a lot more libraries take on the GPL license as opposed to the MIT or other license that are available, but lots of them. I think of the 5 libraries, 4 of them were GPL licensed. I finally was able to find one that was MIT licensed. Again, with MIT, I can just put a license notice and copyright notice in my documentation or whatever to say that I am using this one little module that so-and-so wrote, give them full credit, and a link to the repo so that they can, again, get credit for the work that they've done. But again, it's solving a problem that it's not like they've got some super secret AI algorithm that's going to change the world. This is just a simple HTTP implementation. And so I finally was able to find one, and I went through, and it has a lot more features than I need. All I need is a simple GET. And so I was able to pull that in and actually just go underneath. It was written in C++ to use socket objects in the Linux world. And I just went into all the places in the code where it uses a socket and swapped it out for our TCP client object that we have in the Particle ecosystem. And surprisingly enough, after changing about like 8 or 9 lines of code, it actually worked. I was able to make simple HTTP GET requests using this library. And so the balance that I'm trying to find here is that I've got a lot more code now than I actually want. It supports basic authentication and iCalendar responses and all this other stuff that I don't need. I just need to make a simple HTTP request and get a response. And so I'm trying to find the balance between taking that code out of the box and using it that's been tested and developed by somebody else versus spinning my own using the TCP client for Photon. And then it's a much smaller code base. I've written every single line of code, so I have a much better ability to get in there and figure it out and debug it. And so I think for now we're going to go with the HTTP library that I found. I will put a link to it down in the description so you can check that out if you're interested. But I think we're going to start there and see how the performance goes, see if we have any issues with getting stats onto the puck. So that is the update for today. I'm going to finish up again the HTTP integration. There's a couple of things that I need to do to get it to where I'm actually displaying stats from the call. And that's it. That's where we're at. So I appreciate everybody tuning in and watching. Let's go back to doing a question of the day. Question of the day. Let's see. Okay, I got one. A little bit of a controversial one. Not really. Tell me your thoughts about open source software versus proprietary software. Some people are hardline, all software should be open source for all of the world to enjoy forever and not be able to be monetized in that it's kept proprietary behind a paywall so that we can't release it. And you should find other ways to monetize. Other people think, yeah, open source is great as long as it's modularized and it can be used behind proprietary paywalls. So what are your thoughts on open source versus proprietary software and charging people money for it? I appreciate your input and comments, and thanks so much for watching Daily IoT, the show where together we're learning how to make the Internet of Things one day at a time.